All right, now if I was to say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, you would probably agree with me because that is a well-known phrase. But if you were to Google breakfast is the most important meal of the day, Kellogg's, then you will find that is actually a marketing phrase that Kellogg's invented in 1917 and then made very popular, and is not some age-old, like ancient knowledge that humans had. Okay, it's only been around for just over 100 years, but Kellogg's was so successful at marketing that phrase to market its own brand of breakfast that it became a popular phrase that a lot of people believe in, all right? And this is what this video is about. A lot of general knowledge that people have about nutrition and health based on stuff that's actually down to marketing and also just pure corruption that's happened because of funding from the food and pharmaceutical industry, all right? So before we start, I want to make a few disclaimers. First of all, I am not a medical doctor, all right? But everything in this video, you can Google yourself, and as I do with a lot of my videos on this channel, I will put the key phrases so that you can enter it in Google yourself, and also I will put the links to a lot of the stuff that I bring up in the description of this video so that you can fact check it all yourself, all right? Especially because based on how controversial this video is, I'm sure somebody will try to flag it or whatever. So I'll have to prove myself to YouTube if somebody does that. But everything in this video you can find on Google, and there'll be actually a lot of information just on Wikipedia, right? And whoever wrote the articles will have to cite the sources that they used, all right? The second disclaimer I want to make is that I've put $11,000 on Donald Trump winning the election next week, all right? And that is a significant disclaimer to make because what happens in the beginning of this video is actually linked to the US election and has had an impact on the US election, whether Donald Trump wins or not. And I put 10,000 with the bookies and 1,000 I've bet against a friend who will be watching this video, and you're gonna lose your money, bro. And the third disclaimer I wanna make is that what has happened because of the marketing that the food and pharmaceutical industry has done, and also straight up corruption in the system, has negatively impacted the health of people in the United States and globally, and a lot of people don't even know about this, all right? So just in the last 12 months or so, I've known a bunch of people who've gotten cancer, and they wouldn't even know before I pointed out why they had gotten the cancer. But a lot of it has to do with the amount of chemicals that we use around us, and also because of the food that we eat, all right? And I've addressed that in multiple videos in the past. In fact, all I've done in the last few months is basically focus on cancer research. All right, so this video is about the history of how we got to where we are now, where Americans are the sickest people in the world, all right? Life expectancy has gone up steadily in developed countries, but actually the life expectancy in the US peaked in 2014 and has since gone down, partially because of COVID, but has stayed down now, even though COVID's finished, and is back at around the level of 1996, all right? And I don't want to scare parents, but their kids, all right, kids growing up now will be the first generation of people whose life expectancy will be shorter than their parents, all right, for sure, because of the amount of chemicals that we use and the foods that parents are feeding their kids, like cereals, which are full of food dyes, all right, and this impacts other countries as well, because a lot of countries follow the US system. For example, I live in Taiwan, and Taiwan is legal to use a lot of the food dyes in the US. So for example, the yellow dye on this chart is yellow 5 in the US, and the red dye is red 40 in the US. And these dyes cause a lot of health issues, which I'll address in another video. And the yellow dye is also used in Australia, by the way. I think it's called color 102. All right. So anyway, this is a brief history of the marketing and the corruption that the food and pharmaceutical industry has used over the years to get to where we are now, where people are paying more and more for medicine. And in the UK and in countries where there's free healthcare, the healthcare system is starting to collapse because doctors are swamped, and also they're running huge deficits just to fund their free healthcare system because people's health are so messed up, all right? So first of all, we should start off with the tobacco industry because that links into all of it. So in the late 19th century, tobacco companies started marketing to the population, and they did things like going to schools to tell kids and their parents that smoking was actually very healthy for children. And back in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot of children smoking because a lot of people thought it was healthy. And then smoking really took off during World War I because they started handing out free cigarettes to troops, okay? And basically every 5 years during the late 19th century and the early 20th century, smoking rates doubled. And then in also from a chronological order, around the earlier 20th century was also when the fake oil, industrial oil industry took off, and also when the pharmaceutical industry took off, all right? So in 1903, the German company IG Farben, okay, which was the biggest chemical company in Germany at the time, which was merged by 6 different companies. The head of that company visited the US and visited Standard Oil and had a long discussion with D Rockefeller, who was the richest man in the world at the time. And then D Rockefeller made a big investment and took a stake in IG Farben. Okay, IG Farben was the company who was producing a lot of the pharmaceuticals pre-World War II and a lot of the chemicals in Germany. And also they supplied the Nazi regime during World War II. And then when the Allies defeated the Germans, they broke up that company into 6 different companies again. And one of them is Bayer, which is now one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, right? So D Rockefeller then invested in the pharmaceutical industry, and he was very interested in this industry because a lot of because he was in the oil industry, and a lot of the chemicals that was produced as a result of the oil industry, he could then use it and put into pharmaceuticals, all right? So what D Rockefeller did in 1910 was to get his lawyer to write up what was called the Flexner Report, all right? And the Flexner Report, basically, at the time, there were a lot of other types of medicine around, okay? So there was like natural medicine, which focused on natural healing and using like plants and herbs for healing. And then there was holistic medicine, which is not some hippie medicine. It is basically just focusing on the body as a whole, all right? So for example, if, say you eat a food which inflames your body, then that could cause you to have heart disease over time, because inflammation of the arteries cause heart disease. But the same inflammation from the food could cause your joints to get inflamed and then cause you arthritis. And modern medicine breaks up all the different components of the body separately. So the heart will be addressed by a cardiologist, while the joints will be addressed by an orthopedic surgeon, all right? But back then, holistic medicine was a big part of medicine at the time, and the Flexner Report basically discredited all the other types of medicines and then focused on allopathic medicine, which is medicine based on pharmaceuticals and surgery, which then became what is known as the modern style of medicine, evidence-based medicine, all right? And evidence-based medicine is pretty much the best form of medicine because you can't just have, say, even if a guy is an expert in a field, you can't just base all your medical practices on the opinions of an expert. You have to form a body of evidence through scientific research to make sure that what you are following is the correct way to practice medicine. But there's one problem in having science-based medicine, which is what happens if the pharmaceutical industry, which is profit-based, okay, all the big pharmaceutical industries in the world right now are publicly listed companies, shareholders own them, so their goal is to generate as much profit as possible, okay, just like any other company. What happens if the pharmaceutical industry starts producing research to justify more pharmaceutical sales and not in the interest of the public to get as much health, to get people healthy, all right? So that all started in 1910, okay? In 1911 was when Procter and Gamble came up with the product Crisco, right? And Crisco is a shortening made from cottonseed oil, okay? Prior to that, cottonseed oil was actually used in engine lubricants, okay? But Procter and Gamble and also some companies later on decided that humans could eat it and they will market it to humans for cooking and stuff like that. So later on, the industry also produced margarine, which became a popular substitute for butter. Okay, in 1915, the American Heart Association was formed, and this is formed by a group of doctors who were interested in just the heart, all right? But at the time, heart disease rates, okay, cardiovascular disease rates were very low, although they were starting to pop up because of smoking, okay? And later on, heart disease rates kept climbing until the 1950s, and that was probably mainly due to smoking, but also because of the use of a lot of these man-made industrial grade artificial oils, which were replacing animal fats and butter. And then in 1917, Kellogg's, which was founded in the late 19th century, came up with the marketing term, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, all right? So throughout the 1920s, more and more people were smoking, and more and more people started using these vegetable oils, which are now known as seed oils, for cooking and for using margarine as spreads on their bread. And that really took off during World War II because all the men went off to fight, so there weren't enough farm laborers. And then obviously America was shipping a lot of the food to the UK during World War II. So food prices climbed and butter prices climbed. And then margarine really became a popular substitute for butter during World War II. And in 1948 was when when Procter and Gamble first paid the American Heart Association to market its Crisco as a very healthy shortening to use for cooking. And at the time, the American Heart Association was full of doctors, and they had a big debate, and half of the doctors did not want to accept outside money because that would cause a conflict of interest and affect how their organization worked, okay? And then the other half wanted to take the money, and the half that wanted to take the money won over the debate, and so they took the money from Procter and Gamble. And from then on, the American Heart Association just started taking more and more money, and these days they take a lot of money from different processed food companies, all right? So after World War II, in 1955, then President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and this is during a time when heart attack rates were starting to go up, and Eisenhower was a heavy smoker. And they didn't know at the time that smoking was causing heart disease. So there was a big scare, and everyone wanted to find out what was causing all these heart attacks, especially when the president himself had gotten a heart attack. So it caused a race amongst the scientists to go and find out the reason for the increased rates of heart attacks. And then a prominent scientist called Ancel Keys, who was so prominent that during World War II, the rations used by the American Army called the K rations was actually named after him, all right? So K rations named after Keys. He, in 1956, started what was called the 7-country study, and he looked at available data at the time of cardiovascular disease against saturated fat consumption, all right? Because his hypothesis was that saturated fats in animal fats was causing the heart disease. But that was his hypothesis, right? So as a scientist, you're meant to test out your theory, not to try and prove your theory, especially by cheating. But that is exactly what Ancel Keys did. So at the time, there was data from 22 countries for saturated fat levels versus saturated fat intake versus cardiovascular disease rates. And he scrapped the data points for all the other countries that didn't fit his hypothesis, and then only picked data from 7 countries, which would then plot a perfect chart to prove his hypothesis. So he ignored data from somewhere like France, where the French do a lot of their cooking with butter and eat a lot of red meats, yet they had low cardiovascular disease rates, okay? And then Ancel Keys' research, because he's a prominent scientist, became very well known, and a lot of scientists then pursued that path of research. And then another important date on the timeline of where the corruption came in was in 1967, the sugar industry paid off 3 Harvard scientists to do research, and then to say that basically sugar does not cause disease and sugar is very healthy, okay? And this was part of the kind of like movement to shift people off fats, which were actually perfectly healthy for human beings, and to shift them to sugar and high carbohydrate diets. So then we skip another 10 years, and in 1977, Senator George McGovern, at the time, wanted to find a reason to help farmers sell more grain, okay? And then he set up what was called the McGovern Report, okay? And used research such as Ancel Keys' study and subsequent research to justify coming up with new nutritional guidelines, which were then used by the then very new United States Department of Agriculture nutritional guidelines to get people to eat more and more grains. But the aim there wasn't for public health, it was basically to sell more grains, all right? And that then became what was known as the food pyramid in 1993. And then in the early 1980s, the tobacco companies, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, then took over 3 of the largest food companies in the world, okay? General Mills, Kraft, and Nabisco, all right? And they were 3 of the biggest mergers at the time, which were not oil related. And what the tobacco companies did is basically they shifted a lot of their scientists over to the food companies, okay, because they were seeing basically regulations were starting to kick in the 1980s, because people finally realized that smoking was harmful to their health, and the government in Western countries are starting to regulate cigarette smoking, such as not being able to smoke on planes and in public places. And then they took over the food companies to then diversify their portfolio and get a new income source. And they moved their scientists over to the food companies for two main purposes. One, to make their food as addictive as possible. So they started increasing the amount of sugar in their food, and also come up with new chemical created flavorings and emulsifiers to make the food taste and the texture to be as nice as possible, to get people as addicted as possible to their food products. And then the other thing is they started putting in these industrially made seed oils, which, by the way, is made with the addition of hexane, which is a hydrocarbon similar to gasoline. And also the seed oils have to be bleached because when they're produced, they're rancid. And so the amount of chemicals in seed oils is just crazy, right? And the seed oils are put into processed foods to increase shelf life. Okay, so basically in the past, for example, biscuits were made with butter, but then they can only keep for a very short period of time and they'll go off. Using seed oils instead of butter allows the product to be put on shelves for months, if not a year or so. And a lot of these things that I've talked about was written, was in the book, The Big Fat Surprise, which was published in 2014. And I'll put the link of the author explaining the key points of how Ancel Keys cheated on his study and how these seed oils became popular. So around the turn of the 21st century, in the late 1990s was when the pharmaceutical industry started funding more and more research as well to create a body of evidence to support more and more use of pharmaceutical products. Okay. A lady called Marcia Engel, who was the head of the New England Journal of Medicine, basically the chief editor, realized this, and she was very critical of all the research that the pharmaceutical industry was generating, and she was very critical of the industry, and she even wrote a book herself, which was published in 2005. Okay, and let me see what she said herself. The pharmaceutical industry has moved very far from its original purpose of discovering and producing useful new drugs, now primarily a marketing machine to sell drugs of dubious benefit. This industry uses its wealth and power to co-opt every institution that might stand in its way, including the US Congress, the FDA, academic medical centers, and the medical profession itself. Most of its marketing efforts are focused on influencing doctors since they must write the prescriptions, okay? And this, again, was the head of the most prestigious medical journal herself, and saying this 20 years ago, all right? So as an example of how this negatively affects the medical industry, in 1999, Merck, one of the biggest drug companies in the world, started selling a brand of anti-inflammatory drugs called Vioxx. And they sold it until 2004, when it was finally recalled because it caused between estimated 88,000 to 140,000 cases of heart attacks and strokes, and killed a lot of people as a result. And in the subsequent class action lawsuit, they were fined $4.8 billion. The problem is they made $12 billion off the drugs, so they still managed to pocket over $7 billion in revenue. Why was a drug like this allowed to be sold if it was causing problems and killing a bunch of people and wasn't pulled for 5 years? Because the pharmaceutical industry can actually pay the Food and Drug Administration. In fact, if you Google FDA user fees, then you will find that 45% of the revenue for the Food and Drug Administration of the United States actually comes from the very food and pharmaceutical companies that they are meant to regulate, okay? Now, any idiot can figure out that would immediately expose that regulatory body to a conflict of interest and bribery. And on top of that, they can actually take just gifts from the industry, okay? Like donations from the industry. So the industry also funnels hundreds of millions of dollars to the FDA. And in the last 25 years, 30% of the drugs which have been approved by the FDA have been subsequently pulled after years because they created major side effects that were harmful to the people taking the drugs, which is a huge amount, okay? Imagine if you take a drug and then you develop serious health issues, and years later they pull the drug, and then you try to sue the company, but the company is never really punished properly because they still make money off the drug even after paying the fines or settling the lawsuits, and none of the executives are ever prosecuted, all right? So, and that's led up to the modern day issue where it's come out just last year, basically 95% of the nutritional guidelines panel of the FDA have actually taken money from food and pharmaceutical companies, which will probably go and explain why just this year the FDA publicly announced that there was no evidence that ultra-processed foods cause obesity, which is absolutely ridiculous because anyone can go and eat processed foods and find that it is very, very fattening, all right? And a lot of this information came out because of a guy called Calley and Means, okay, who was actually a lobbyist for Coca-Cola and for the pharmaceutical companies in Washington, who was paying off a lot of the members of Congress, a lot of the scientists involved in doing the nutritional research, and he knew all the inside out of the industry. So for example, as I mentioned, the American Heart Association gets a lot of money from processed food companies, but the American Diabetes Association, apparently according to Calley and Means, okay, I haven't been able to fact check this, but I'm sure he backed up data or has evidence, or he will get sued, right? Cadbury's chocolate paid the American Diabetes Association $100 million over the years. In fact, on their own webpage, the American Diabetes Association kind of like very proudly lists all the sponsors for their organization, and they have something called the Banting Circle Elite, where companies who give them over $1 million each year are listed in this circle of friends, right? And not only has the processed food and the pharmaceutical industry paid off these professional sounding public interest companies, organizations who are not really trying to look out for the public health. Because, for example, the American Diabetes Association on their own website says it's okay for diabetics to still consume sugar and have to have a sugary soda once in a while, which will make no sense whatsoever, because if you are diabetic, you should not be consuming sugar at all, right? If you want to reverse your insulin resistance, you should cut out sugar. But obviously, because like companies like Coca-Cola and Cadbury's has given them money, then they want to tell people that it's still okay to consume sugar, right? And in addition to that, Calley and Means, who was making the rounds on the podcasts, okay, going on Dr. Phil, going on the Tucker Carlson show, going on the Joe Rogan show, along with his sister, Casey Means, who was top of her class at Stanford University and was a doctor. They were basically talking about all this corruption, and the head of nutrition research at Harvard University, at Stanford University, and at Tufts University, they were all taking consultation fees from the processed food industries to then develop research to basically say that the ingredients used in a lot of the processed foods was basically okay. And Tufts University designed an actual classification system to basically say, like kids' cereals, which were full of sugar and artificial dyes, which are chemical based and causes problems with kids, is worse than cooking eggs in butter. So the food industry produces research which basically tries to get people to think that their ingredients are perfectly okay, and that makes sense because they just want to lower their costs, increase the shelf life of their product, and also increase the addictiveness of their product, and that makes completely commercial sense. Okay, what is even darker is when the pharmaceutical industry creates a huge body of research to basically get people to eat in a certain way and live in a certain way, which is not optimal for their health, and over long periods of time, then they will develop chronic health diseases. Now, I'll give you 3 examples of studies like this. Just this year alone, there were 3 studies which were basically on mass media, okay, on the health websites of a lot of media companies, which said basically a high protein intake would cause heart disease, okay, and that intermittent fasting was associated with heart disease, and then that even being in the sun, getting sunlight, would be associated with heart disease. And all 3 studies had problems in the design and the interpretation of their results, but was widely distributed amongst the media. Now you have to wonder why there are thousands of studies done globally every month, but we never hear about them. Yet these 3 studies were widely distributed in the media, and it is because the pharmaceutical companies advertise in the US, and because of the relationship they have with the media companies, then they can push the studies that they want to push, which will be distributed in the media outlets, okay? All the other studies done independently, which will probably point to the ingredients in the processed food being unhealthy, are generally unknown, all right? It's not like everyone goes on PubMed on medical or nutritional physiology related journals and then does their own research. People generally just read the health section of a website and then formulate their own idea of nutrition based on that. So basically, there's a lot of corruption going on. The FDA and the USDA nutritional guideline panel members have been paid off by the processed food industry as well as the pharmaceutical industry. And a lot of the professional organization have been paid off by the big companies as well, big food and big pharma. How does this link into the US election? Well, first of all, Elon Musk is now on Trump's team, and he has promised that if Trump gets elected, then he will, according to his own words, form the Department of Government Efficiency or something like that, and basically streamline the government processes. And so he's joined Trump's team, and also the other guy who's joined Trump's team, and also at the time when he joined, he had, in the opinion polls, he had 6% of likely voters who were supporting him was Robert Kennedy Jr., who's the nephew of JFK. He ran on the platform of Make America Healthy Again, and picked up 6% of the vote, but a couple of months ago he decided like there's no way he'll have a chance, so he decided to endorse Donald Trump. And he has the goal of basically firing most of the people in the US Department of Agriculture and firing people in the Food and Drug Administration and building those regulatory bodies up from the ground up. Because what's happened, because they've taken money from the food industry and from the pharmaceutical industry, they've been subject to what's called regulatory capture, okay, when basically the regulatory bodies are no longer acting in the public health interest and basically just trying to support the sales of the companies that are actually meant to be regulating themselves. So he's gonna, if Trump wins, he's gonna start firing a lot of people at the FDA and USDA, and he's also gonna try to enforce stricter guidelines for the pharmaceutical industries, including for them not to be able to advertise anymore in the US, so to not have control over the media companies. And then also, even when it comes to fast food, he wants to remove these unhealthy seed oils from the food supply, because the seed oils are used to do frying at the fast food companies, and then replace them with beef tallow, which was what was used for frying fries and other fried foods back in the 1970s before they switched the ingredient to reduce their costs, all right? So that is the full history of from basically the very beginning of the 20th century to where we are now, and why so many people are getting chronic health issues, and why chronic health diseases have soared for the last few decades, and why the medical industry has not been able to tackle the problem, because the doctors themselves have to follow the science which is being pumped out by the pharmaceutical industry themselves, okay? Because the body of evidence is funded by the pharmaceutical industry, and that sets the standard of care which the hospitals then have to follow, and then individuals have to follow, all right? So I have a lot of doctor friends, and if any of them are watching this video, I'm not critical of doctors, individual doctors. I'm just critical of the actual system itself. And then I do follow many doctors who are now have quit their jobs at the hospital and are basically influencers on YouTube and on Instagram, and they get people to try to follow more healthy practices by doing things like fasting and how to cut chemicals out of life and cut processed foods out of their life and eat healthy again, all right? Which is what I'm trying to do in this channel as well, with a huge emphasis on cancer, just because so many of my friends people I've known have gotten cancer in the last year, and plus people in the past, all right? So remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll try to come up with more content in the future about this whole thing with the processed food industry, especially if Trump wins, all right? If Trump loses, then no change will happen, and I'm going to lose $11,000. But if Trump wins, then you will see major changes to the food and pharmaceutical industries, and then to like the USDA and the FDA and their nutritional guidelines starting next year, right? So it'll be a very, very interesting time, because right now it's very similar to the 1970s and 1980s, when people first started realizing that smoking is actually not healthy, and this is a repeat of that, all right, that period, but it's more down to food, all right? So until next time, remember to like and subscribe to the video and to the channel, all right?